Do you guys believe in reincarnation? Is that a thing in Judaism? I don't know. Show of hands, who would say, yeah, of course we believe in reincarnation. Why not? And who would say, no, that's not a Jewish thing. We don't find that in the classic Jewish literature. The truth is, where in the Chumash do we find the concept of Gilgul Neshama? Not limited to Chumash, but Nevi'im, Ksuvim. Nowhere explicit. We definitely have many interesting stories about interactions with Neshamos in a different realm, in a different world, but the notion of a Neshama coming back and being reborn is definitely not explicit in Tanakh. All through Mishnayos, we don't have any allusion to Gilgul Neshama until we get to Shas. All throughout the Talmud, if you had to guess, how many places throughout the Talmud do we have stories or direct references to Gilgul Neshama? What would you say? 0. Again, there's a lot of very fascinating Gemaras about interactions with the different realm and the neshamos of those who are no longer present in Olam Hazeh. But the explicit mention or reference of Gilgul Neshama, the idea of a neshama being reborn into a new guf, brought back into a new body, we don't find that explicitly mentioned anywhere in Shas. It was because of the lack of a reference to Gilgul Neshama that there were actually some of the Gaonim, going back to the 9th and 10th century, that were not convinced the belief in reincarnation was actually a Jewish belief. Mehechi teisi. Where does it come from? Where does it say so? We're going to see together momentarily a very interesting story that the Stipler brings in his Sefer Chai Olam regarding one of the Gaonim who started off very skeptical about the belief in Gilgul Neshama, and there was an incident that changed his view. At the end of the Parsha, we have the tragic episode of the Mekalel, V'yetze ben Isha Yisraelis, V'hu ben Ish Mitzri. You had this person who was the son of the Egyptian man and also the Jewish woman. He goes out b'toch b'nei Yisrael v'yenotzu b'machane ben Yisraelis v'ish ha-Yisraeli. And he gets into a fight, and we know from Torah Shebaal Peh, the basic disagreement was he wanted a place to live. He wanted to join a particular shevet and be part of a territory. But because his father was a Mitzri, he had no official legal status. And he wasn't allowed in based on a sense of rejection and frustration and hopelessness. V'yikov ben ha'isha ha'Yisraelis es Hashem v'yikalel. He pronounced the name of God, and he actually was in violation of being Mekalel, of cursing Hashem. They brought him before Moshe, and then it concludes, interestingly, almost like a parenthetical statement, that his mother's name was Shlomis Bas Divri, from the tribe of Dan. Al Pi Kabbalah, we have a tradition based on different Kabbalistic sources that the Mitzri, the father of this person who was the Mekalel, was actually a Gilgul of Cain. He was a Gilgul of Cain. When we say phrases like that so-and-so was a Gilgul of somebody else, do you know what that means? Of course you don't know what that means. None of us know what that means. It means on some level there was a connection to the neshama of Cain that was within this Mitzri. And possibly, the Ber Mayim Chaim explains, the son of the Mitzri was also a continuation of that Gilgul of Cain. Ki oso Mitzri haya Gilgul Cain, shal Cain hargu Moshe, shehu Gilgul Hevel. Moshe ends up killing this particular Egyptian because Moshe was a Gilgul of Hevel, meaning that there was some level of the neshama of Hevel, who was killed by Cain, that was transmitted into the neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu. Lechaper al ma shehargu begilgul ha'avar. Part of his reasoning, right, at face value, is just to save the life of this poor Jew who was the victim of the aggression of the Mitzri. But on a deeper level, it was to help bring kapara, to help grant atonement for Cain in the previous Gilgul. Cain hayagonev das Elyona. We know that Cain, although he didn't directly curse God, but it was kechiruf v'giduf. It was very similar conceptually when he basically denied or questioned Hashem's awareness of what was actually happening. That was a form of giduf. That was a form of blasphemy. So because Cain was in violation of chiruf v'giduf in the previous Gilgul, Cain killed his brother. Moshe, as a Gilgul of Hevel, explains the Ber Mayim Chaim, was bringing or trying to bring some level of atonement to Cain. What's sad, and this is the tragic ending of the story, when the pasuk says V'yetze ben Isha Yisraelis, Rashi quotes from Chazal, Rabbi Levi Omer, Mehechan Yotza, where did he leave from? Me'olomo Yotza, he left his world. And the way the Ber Mayim Chaim explains this, based on the background of the Mitzri and this Mekalel being a Gilgul of Cain and Moshe being a Gilgul of Hevel, is that there was an opportunity for kapara. It could very well be that this person, this Ben Yisraelis, this very troubled young man who came from a background of trauma, his father the Mitzri who was killed by Moshe, his mother Shlomis Vas Divri, not being accepted in Klal Yisrael and feeling this rejection and the frustration. It could be, says the Ber Mayim Chaim, his entire life was leading up to this point to be able to overcome this nisayon, to deal with it in a healthy way and not lash out against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that itself could have been a tikkun, that could have rectified past Gilgulim. But unfortunately, V'yetze ben Isha Yisraelis, Yotze me'olamo, he blew it. He didn't fulfill the role of this particular Gilgul. There's a beautiful Chafetz Chaim in the Sefer Svas Tamim, where he speaks about different situations where a person might come back as a Gilgul. Gezel, being dishonest, taking money or someone's possessions that don't rightfully belong to me, if I don't somehow make good, if I don't somehow rectify that dishonesty in this world, that is one of the classic examples of needing to come back as a Gilgul Neshama. Chafetz Chaim writes, he says, we have actually an episode going back to the times of the Rivash, the times of the Rishonim, where there was one particular person who was involved with all sorts of inappropriate conduct in business. Shebo echad begilgul sus. And there was a Masorah, this person came back, not even as a human being, but as a sus. Haya over bechol kocho kedei lishale meschovo And in this reincarnation, and it seems like, and this is a very interesting facet of Gilgulim, which ultimately we know nothing about, but we have to say something because the topic of the shir is Gilgulim, so we have to share something. It seems like when the neshama comes back in a different body, we have no, at least conscious recollection of what took place in previous Gilgulim. The exception to that rule is when a person comes back in a Gilgul, but not in the form of a human being, in a different life form, as a Tzomeach, as a Chai, in this case, the story of the times of the Rivosh as a Sus. It seems like there's an awareness within this creature or within this life form of who they were in their previous Gilgul. Fascinating. Chafetz Chaim says the reason why we have this notion of Gilgul Neshama connected to Gezela is because there has to be some form of coming back into this world and paying back, even if not the same person, but somehow correcting that flawed midah of taking that which didn't belong to me. Then the Chafetz Chaim, in a footnote, is bothered by the following question. This is a question that I've heard asked before. If we really believe in the notion of reincarnation, so what's the big deal if I happen to mess up? When somebody says, you only live once, this is your one chance, Rabbi Sai. If you don't make it now, you'll never have a second opportunity. That could inspire me to actually take life seriously. But if you're telling me, if you don't do what you need to do now, you'll have a second chance. And if you blow it then, you'll have a third chance. And maybe even a fourth. Right? So don't worry so much. Take it easy. If we have the notion of Gilgul Neshama, I'll come back to fix whatever I don't do now. Mitzvah Hashem will focus on this area of life. And then the next time around, I'll focus on that area of life. And after many cycles, then I'll be the Adam HaSholeh. What's my motivation if we actually believe in Gilgul Neshama? I want to take a look together on page 2. This is the most beautiful and powerful, vivid mashal of the Chafetz Chaim in this sugya of Gilgul Neshama. He asked the question, Ma hezek yagia li? What harm will come to me if I don't maximize my potential now? I'll have a second, third, fourth chance. So he gives the following mashal. You have a fellow who's struggling financially, and everything he's getting involved with, it's just not working. And his family is getting to the point of starvation, and the only option he has is to travel to a faraway land, which means in the olden days taking a boat, not even knowing if you're ever going to see your family again, and hoping, shinui makom, shinui mazel, he'll have more luck elsewhere. Other people have done it. They came back after a few years as wealthy, established people, and they were able to support their families. So this particular father is thinking, this is my hishtadlus. This is what I have to do. So you could imagine the Chafetz Chaim describes what that separation was like. Father saying goodbye to his wife and his children, not knowing when or if he'll see them again, and then getting onto the boat and leaving. When he finally gets to his destination, it takes him years to establish himself. Finally, he finds his niche, and he begins to make some money, and he's matzliach. And again, for the first time, perhaps in years, he has this sense of optimism and hope. I'm getting there. I'm building up towards some level of financial stability. I'm going to hopefully amass this much, and then I'm going to go back home. He's getting ready after 10 years to go back home, and he's dreaming every moment, what are his kids going to look like? Is everyone healthy? Is everybody okay? Were the older ones, are they married now? Do they have children? He can't take his mind off of his family. One of the friends that he made tells him, you know what, before you board the boat and bring all your stuff with you, you should just make sure that you have everything taken care of here, because I've heard that the immigration rules getting back home are very, very difficult. This is in the world of Trump becoming the president, not Biden. You can't just go in through Mexico anymore. And the guy thinks to himself, we'll be okay. Baruch Hashem, I'm good. I have plenty of money. If I need to bribe someone, I will. And he ignores the guy's advice. He gets on the boat and starts traveling home. And the journey itself, writes the Chafetz Chaim, and this is such a beautiful aspect of all the Mishalim and the stories of the Chafetz Chaim, is that every element of the story has a correlation to a different hashkafa. So the Chafetz Chaim says it takes 7 months on that boat, finally getting closer to his hometown. And the way it was in the olden days is you'd have a wall around the city as a form of protection. And he now sees that wall and he recognizes it. He's getting excited. As they're getting closer, someone on the boat starts going around asking questions, looking for paperwork. And he finds this particular man and says, we actually received notice that you owe some people money, back there. And the legalities of this are very clear cut. We're not allowing you to go back home when you still have responsibilities that you have not taken care yet. We're going to have to take you back with us. He assumes that this cannot be the case. The language of the Chafetz Chaim is that as he's waiting there, his family is standing there with hundreds of other families waiting to see their husbands and fathers. Vayismuchu simcha gedola, and they're all rejoicing with a sense of anticipation. Ki choshvu shetekev yered aviyam aleim, they think their father's about to come off that boat and be reunited with them. However, the father is faced with this very difficult reality, and he starts screaming and crying and pleading, you have to let me off. Whatever it is, I'll make sure to pay 10 times whatever I may owe. And they say with force, absolutely not. You're not allowed to get off this boat. Then he starts pleading, just allow me to stay home for a month to be together with my family, to see my children. Vayev ga'ad ma'od b'mar nafsho, and he starts screaming and crying. And they refuse. He says, allow me just to get off to be with them for a moment. Absolutely not. His last request, says the Chafetz Chaim, is, can you allow me just to see them from a distance without getting off the boat? And this request they grant. He sees them, they finally realize, his wife and his children who are standing there, they understand that they will not be reunited with their father. He's screaming, he's crying, they begin to cry as well. And then at that moment he hears the voice, Chazor linkomcha harishon, time to go back to where you came from. In the words of the Chafetz Chaim, mi yuchol l'shayir godel hatzar v'habechi shenase lo v'lehem oz. It is impossible to imagine that level of pain and anguish that the father and his wife and children are experiencing in that moment, knowing that he's got to go back and he might never see them again. The nimshal, the application, writes the Chafetz Chaim, is when we leave this world, although when we're in this world, there's a fear of mortality. We're leaving our family. We're leaving that which is familiar and comfortable. This is reality. And that's why the fear of dying is so incredibly overwhelming. But once the neshama leaves the guf, and you go through not 7 months, but 7 layers of the spiritual atmosphere, so to speak, going through the lower spheros and descending from Olam Hazeh and coming closer to feel that warmth and the light, the kurva of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's a feeling within the essence of the soul, I'm going home. I didn't even realize I was away from home when I was trapped in Olam Hazeh. But now that I've been released, now that I've been liberated, there's a feeling of returning home. And he says it makes sense to feel that way because we know that Toldosein shel tzadikim masim tovim. What are my toldos, the children of every human being? The real children that any human being is able to produce in this world. Even someone who is not zocha to have children, that's not part of the plan that HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated. The real children are masim tovim, my choices, fighting through nisyonos, being able to push through times of darkness, being able to hold on to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even when life was so difficult. Those masim tovim are your real children. And you're returning to those masim tovim. There's a sense of, I'm now going back into the embrace of my family. Can you imagine if you're only able to see that from a distance, but then you hear that voice, Chazor limkomcha rishon. Sorry, we got to bring you back into this cold, finite, distant reality. We got to take you back from your family. We're not allowing you to be reunited. So to the question of, if we believe in reincarnation, what's the big deal? If I don't make it this time, I'll make it next time. Says the Chavetz Chaim, trust me, you don't want to come back again. After you leave this world, more than anything else, you're going to want to return home. The Stipler in his Sefer Chai Olam, he references different stories. We have a very interesting testimony of Rav Shlomo Kalbitz going back to Sfas in the 16th century of a neshama that was trapped within a different body, what we call a dibuk. Dibuk literally means it's clinging, it's glued to a different neshama. The Stipler says, even Bizmanenu, in our times, it was only about 30 years ago, right? So the Stipler was writing this probably in the early 1960s, late 1950s. It was only 30 years ago when we had the well-known, established story of the Chavetz Chaim, who was involved with Girush Gilgul, Al Yedei Asara Talmidei Chachamim, of banishing, of freeing a Gilgul neshama that was bedibuk, that was connected to another person's neshama. And he was able to do so together with 10 Talmidei Chachamim, one of them being Rav Elchanan Wasserman, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh Levracha, Hashem Yikom Damov. And, writes the Stipler, I heard firsthand that Rav Elchanan would share the story of the Dibuk every year at Purim with his Talmidim. Right? You can't beat that story. Once you experience the exorcist of a Dibuk together with the Chavetz Chaim, you are the Rebbe of choice for every Purim Suda. That's an incredible story, hearing it firsthand from Rav Elchanan Wasserman. The incredible reality of a story like this is that it's more than a story. When you have this kind of information that's shared by very honest, ehrlich, people who are aware of their surroundings, who are not psychotic, but they're Gedolei Yisrael, and they're sharing these stories. And we're not talking about 800 years ago. We're talking about last century. That's an incredible insight to the reality of the neshama not being trapped in this world. That's an incredible insight to the reality that there's more to the physical experience than a bunch of chemicals floating around the brain. But then he goes on to speak about directly the concept of Gilgul Neshama, of reincarnation. And the Stipler writes, Me'inyan zeh emunas ha'gilgul, regarding the belief in reincarnation, we're in the middle of page 3. Afal pi shekitzas me rishonim zal harchiku, even though there were some of the rishonim who were not convinced that reincarnation is a Jewish hashkafa. Like we mentioned, there's no explicit reference to Gilgul Neshama anywhere in Tanakh or in Shas. Nonetheless, Rubam Ashru V'Kaimu, the majority of Rishonim did assume that Gilgul Neshama was indeed Emes Lamito, and this was the position of all of our Gedolei Achronim, the Gra included. And then he quotes an amazing tshuva, a tshuva going back to the times of the Gaonim, to the 10th century. One of the Gaonim who was very skeptical regarding Gilgul Neshama, Shelo hayamaimin begilgul, ad shara yelid ben chatzi shana, until he himself experienced a child 6 months old, shayachola kol hazman ad shenasa goses. A terrible situation. Child was born ill and was a chola his entire life until he became a goses, on the verge of leaving this world. Ubishas gesisaso kora shma Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And it's recorded, this is quoted in the Shem HaGedolim from the Chidah, that he was getting from this particular Gaon, that the changing point of his Emunah in Gilgul is when he himself personally witnessed this 6-month-old say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Ad sheyotza nishmoso be'echad. Ume'oz, and from that point on, him in Begilgul, he believed that obviously this must have been a neshama that was here before. And even here, concludes the Stipler, in Eretz Yisrael, in the year Tafshin Tesvav, 1956, we all were aware of this child who was 4 years old living in Beersheba, who knew Shas and Rishonim Baal Peh, that he never heard, he had no exposure to in his short time on this planet. These are clear indications that neshamas that may be here now were here before. When the Ramchal and the Derech Hashem speaks about the concept of Gilgul Neshama, the way he describes it is really another chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world as an expression of love, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, and the infinite wisdom of Hashem, Sidra Laharbos Od Ha'atzala, orchestrated within the creation another avenue of Hatzalah, another way that we can be successful in life. That even though we might have gufim shonim, have different bodies throughout the doros, the neshama has the ability to come back, to be misakein, to rectify any potential kilkol, imperfection in the previous Gilgul, o lahashlim mashalo heshlima. Very interesting addition. Says the Ramchal, not only is the purpose of a Gilgul, the idea of coming back into this world, the same neshama being recycled, so to speak, is to be able to rectify kilkulim of the past. It could also be there were aspects or elements of shleimus, of a wholesomeness of my avodas Hashem that I wasn't able to access. That could be another reason why the neshama comes back. And I do want to point out here a very, very important idea. When we speak about the neshama coming back, it's very common to picture this little fuzzy ball of light. That's the neshama, and it was in this body back in the 1700s, and then perhaps it was in this body going to the 1800s and so on. And then you have very practical questions like, well, how does this all play out during Techiyas HaMeisim? If we're going to have a point in time after Yemos HaMashiach where there's going to be a real resurrection, there's going to be a revival of life, neshama and guf together, although it's going to be very different than our present reality, it'll be more similar to the Gan Eden, Kodem Achet. But who will my family be? Will I be together with my wife and children from the Gilgul of the 21st century? Will I be together with my wife and children from the Gilgul of the 18th century? How does that work? And in many Gilgulim, perhaps, a person had a very different family structure. Am I part of a family? Am I not? So many questions come up. And the answer is, it'll all work out. Don't stress it. But the way we envision it, all right, obviously to try to picture something we can't picture, but the best mashal is what we find in the Medrash Rabbah, the idea of a massive torch. You could have a torch, a fire, and theoretically you could light how many candles from that torch? Billions! And you could have a lot more fire, theoretically, than the source of that Aish initially. So when we picture Gilgul Neshama, it's true, it's the same soul coming back into Olam Hazeh, but it means it's coming from the same Shorish Neshama. It's coming from the same torch of fire. Ultimately, you could have different candles and different realities coming from the same place. I hope that was clear to you because it wasn't clear to me. But it's a good image. The Ramchal continues and he says, you should know there are many details and different aspects of Gilgul Neshama, and Hakol al pi hamishpat ha'amiti v'hayosher, everything is based on Hashem's justice and truth, but obviously this is well above and beyond anything we could have any real grasp of. Now we said in Tanakh there's really no reference or story of Gilgul Neshama. Is that entirely true? It's not. Because we know that based on the Zohar and based on the commentary of the Vilna Gaon, the story of Yonah is really a story in Tanakh of Gilgul Neshama. The Gra, based on the Zohar, bottom of page 5, he explains that the entire narrative of the story of Yonah means dove. That was the name of the prophet as well. But it's also being merames, it's alluding to the neshama, the Yonah in Kabbalistic literature. The neshama is called Yonah. So the neshama is sent on a particular mission, as is every neshama. And if the neshama runs away from that reality and chooses to ignore and remain numb to its purpose, it'll be sent again. And that's the basic storyline of Sefer Yonah. The Gra highlights, he says that it's Yonah ben Amitai, which means the neshama ben laHakodesh Baruch Hu, the child of Hashem. Hashem, right? Chosamo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu emes. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is true. Yonah ben Amitai is sent to Nineveh, is sent into Olam Hazeh, Emor, to share a message, to share the message of his particular neshama, the tikkun that he himself needs, and the tikkun that he could try to bring to others. Kum leich, arise and go. Arise from your place in Gan Eden where the neshama is presently located and go into Olam Hazeh. And Yonah finds an aniyah, a ship, and the ship is referring to the guf. The ship is the body of the soul. And the ship, the aniyah, traverses the yam, the water. Olam Hazeh is dome liyam. This world is analogous to the sea. And the pains and the suffering of this world are the waves that come crashing down on us as we travel. But no one intends to stay in the sea forever. It's only a place we travel through. The Yabasha, the dry land, that's the Olam Ha'emes. That's Olam Haba. That's our mainstay. That's our home, like we saw before from the Chafetz Chaim. And there comes a point where Aniyah Chashva Li'ishaver, where the boat seems like it's going to break. And there the Gra explains that because for many years of one's life, when we're young and vibrant and there's no such thing as mortality, we don't realize that we have a limited time here to accomplish. La'olam lo yamus aval achshav. But as the waves start crashing and the storm comes and older age sets in, roa umaschil lahazkir, then we begin to remember, 1 second, we're not going to be around here forever. I don't have unlimited time to accomplish and become the person I really had in mind to become. And then what happens? Yonah is swallowed up by the dog Godel Livloa as Yonah says the Gra, the dog Godel is the kever. That's being swallowed up by the kever, the grave. And he's there for 3 days. What's significant about 3 days? We know, the Yerushalmi and Kabbalistic literature tell us that after a person passes away, the neshama hovers around the guf for 3 days. It's almost as if the reality hasn't set in that I'm no longer part of this physical guf. You have 3 days of the neshama hovering around the guf. And then the Devar Hashem comes to Yonah again. Here says the Gra, Shisholeach oso begilgul l'saked avoso. When Yonah is spit out of the dog Godel onto the Yabasha, and now Hashem comes to Yonah a second time, this is the source in Nevi'im, says the Vilna Gaon, that we have the idea of Gilgal Neshama. Yonah now has a second chance. The Gra concludes by asking a very important question, which is, okay, so maybe I've been here before, maybe I've been here 70 times before, but what am I supposed to be focused on? What am I here to be misake? The Gra says, Yesh al zeh beis simanim, there are 2 indications that a person can have a little bit of a clue. Obviously, we all have the same responsibility of Taryag mitzvos, of halachta b'derachav, trying to emulate Hashem. But my particular mission, we have 2 indications. Aleph, what was it, or what is it now, rather, that I'm struggling with, that I have a difficult time doing, even though I know I have to do it? What relationship in my life is the most challenging? And 2, very closely connected to 1, what is the area of life I find myself failing the most? What's the most challenging nisayon? And connected with that nisayon, what area, what relationship, what aspect of my avodas Hashem do I find that I'm struggling with the most? That might be a very helpful indication. This is what I'm here to be misake. Although the Gra doesn't mention this, we do find a 3rd indication in the Sefer Shevet Musar. This is one of the classic Musar Svarim that incorporates very interesting ideas from Kabbalah going back to the 18th century. And the Shevet Musar writes, another thing to look for in one's avodas Hashem to understand, why am I here again? What am I being misakein? is to ask myself, what do I enjoy doing? What aspect of Avodas Hashem do I feel connected to? What kind of learning do I really thrive in? Don't ignore that. Says the Shevet Musar, Teida be'emes sheba pegamta techila. It could very well be that because I have such a natural yearning for this mitzvah, for this chesed, or for this form of learning Torah, perhaps I was pogame. That was the area I was deficient in a previous Gilgul. Ushlachacha Hashem od b'olam hazeh lahashlima. HaKadosh Baruch Hu set me back into this world to complete my overall connection with the Borei Olam. If I love something, don't ignore it, pursue it. Because it's very likely that's why you're here. I want to end with the following story, an incredible story of the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish was of the opinion that every single person alive is a Gilgul Neshama. We've all been here at least once before, likely more than that. There was a mother who came into his office when the Chazon Ish was already an older man. This is towards the very end of the 1940s, maybe early 1950s. And she came with her son who was severely handicapped, intellectually, physically, and she wanted to get a bracha from the Chazon Ish. As they walked in, the Chazon Ish stood up as an expression of respect. And she was surprised. Older man, Gadol Hador, you're standing up for us. But he said, you have to realize that your son is not able to do many of the mitzvos. And we're all Gilgulei Neshama. The fact that he can't do many of the mitzvos means that his neshama is elevated. He doesn't need the same level of tikkun, the same level of hashlama that what we call normal people require. This is a whole different level neshama. So I'm standing up for him because this is a neshama tehora ad ma'od, and I'm standing up for you because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu granted you a neshama of this caliber, obviously Hashem thinks very highly of you as well. So it's the notion, the belief in Gilgul Neshama can definitely elevate and transform our perception of others, our perception of ourselves, and taking the advice of the Vim Lagon, looking for those areas that we struggle with and looking for those areas that we excel in. And those are the areas we have to think about deeply and pursue them well. Shkoyach.